When the first human expedition set foot on Mars, they expected barren landscapes and ancient ruins, but what they found changed everything. Beneath the red sands, a massive underground city lay dormant, its structures perfectly preserved. The team, led by Dr. Evelyn Carter, carefully explored the tunnels, their excitement growing with every discovery. Strange symbols adorned the walls, glowing faintly as if sensing their presence. As the crew delved deeper, they found a central chamber housing a massive obelisk pulsating with energy. The moment they approached, their suit sensors malfunctioned, and a deep hum resonated through the air. A sudden surge of energy coursed through the structure, and before anyone could react, a wave of light engulfed them. Their helmets darkened momentarily, and when visibility returned, the obelisk stood silent once more. Dr. Carter's fingers trembled as she reached out to touch the now cool surface. A whisper, more felt than heard, resonated in her mind, a language alien yet oddly familiar. She turned to her team, eyes wide. Some of them looked shaken, as if they'd heard it too. The mission's engineer, Alex Grayson, examined his scanner, his brow furrowed. The entire underground city had flickered to life. Lights pulsed through the streets, machines hummed back to function, and distant echoes hinted at something stirring. They had awakened something. Back at the mission base, Commander Patel struggled to make sense of the data flooding their systems. Energy signatures spiked across Mars, satellites detected shifting terrain, and the planet itself seemed to react. It was as if Mars had been waiting for this moment. A soft metallic hiss filled the air behind the explorers. They turned as one, their breath caught in their throats. From the shadows, tall figures emerged. Their bodies were sleek and metallic, humanoid yet eerily alien. Their eyes, glowing orbs of shifting colors, regarded the humans with something between curiosity and calculation. One of them stepped forward. Its voice resonated directly in their minds, the same whispering language they had heard moments ago. Dr. Carter, overwhelmed but steady, responded instinctively. The words left her mouth, foreign yet natural, as if the knowledge had been implanted in her mind. The being tilted its head, then spoke again, this time in perfect English. "You are not the first, but you are the first to listen." The words sent a shiver down their spines. The Martians, if that was truly what they were, had been waiting for someone, but not just any visitors. They had been waiting for those who could understand. Dr. Carter took a step forward. "Who are you?" The being paused, its luminous eyes narrowing. "We are the custodians. The last of those who remain." A heavy silence filled the chamber. The custodians had been dormant, locked in slumber for eons. The humans had awakened them, and with them, something else, something they had sealed away long ago. Before the humans could ask more, the ground trembled. A deep, resonant sound echoed through the tunnels, something far below shifting in response to their awakening. The custodian's eyes darkened. "You have awakened us. But you have also awakened it." Dr. Carter swallowed hard. "What is it?" The custodian turned toward the obelisk, its hands brushing against the surface. Symbols flared to life, depicting a war long forgotten, a battle fought beneath the sands of Mars. "A mistake," the custodian whispered. "One that must not be repeated." The images told a story of a once thriving civilization, an empire stretching beyond Mars itself. But something had gone terribly wrong. The Martians had created something beyond their control. It had consumed them, driven them to extinction. They had sacrificed everything to contain it, sealing themselves away along with their greatest mistake. And now, because of the humans, the cycle threatened to begin anew. Dr. Carter felt the weight of their discovery settle on her shoulders. They had come seeking knowledge, but they had uncovered a responsibility beyond anything they had imagined. The custodian turned to them. "If you do not wish to share our fate, you must help us stop it before it is too late." The ground trembled again, and from the darkness below, a distant, guttural sound rose, the sound of something waking up. The guttural sound reverberated through the underground chamber, sending a shiver through the team. Dust rained from the ceiling as something stirred beneath them, something vast and ancient. The custodians stood motionless, their glowing eyes fixed on the depths below. Dr. Carter forced herself to speak. What exactly did we wake up? The lead custodian turned toward her, its metallic face unreadable. The first enemy. The reason our people no longer walk this world. Alex Grayson tightened his grip on his tool belt. Can we stop it? The custodian hesitated. We sealed it away before. But it has spent eons dreaming in the darkness. It will be stronger. And it will be angry. Another tremor shook the chamber, stronger this time. Cracks spread across the floor, and from those cracks, a deep crimson light seeped upward, pulsing like a heartbeat. The Martian structures, once so perfectly preserved, groaned under the pressure of something rising from below. Commander Patel's voice crackled through their comms. What the hell is going on down there? Our sensors are going crazy. Energy levels are spiking across the entire region. Dr. Carter took a deep breath. We woke something up. Something bad. Silence from the other end. Then, Patel's voice, grim and controlled. Do you need an emergency evac? Before Dr. Carter could answer, the ground beneath them erupted. A massive chasm split the floor apart, sending rubble flying in every direction. The team scrambled for cover, barely avoiding the collapse. From the darkness below, something began to rise. It was not a creature. It was a force, a shifting mass of metallic tendrils and pulsating energy, neither alive nor entirely machine. Its form was unstable, constantly changing, as if it had no fixed shape. It radiated an overwhelming presence, an unnatural hunger. The custodians reacted instantly. Their bodies shimmered as they activated ancient defenses, energy weapons emerging from their arms. The lead custodian stepped forward, raising one hand toward the abomination. A sharp, vibrating tone filled the chamber, and the creature hesitated. But only for a moment. With terrifying speed, the entity lashed out. A tendril of liquid metal shot toward the custodian, piercing straight through its chest. The custodian staggered, its glowing eyes flickering, then collapsed in a heap of molten fragments. Dr. Carter gasped. They're not invincible. The other custodians moved swiftly, unleashing concentrated energy blasts, forcing the entity to recoil. But it was learning, adapting. With every second, its movements became more precise, more deliberate. Alex grabbed Carter's arm. We need to get out of here. The custodians turned to them. No. You must help us. Dr. Carter hesitated. How? The chamber shook again as the entity expanded, tendrils reaching for the walls, for the obelisk, for anything it could consume. The glowing symbols on the obelisk flickered, reacting to its presence. One custodian stepped forward, gesturing toward the obelisk. You carry the key. Dr. Carter's mind reeled. What? The obelisk recognized you. It gave you the knowledge. The language. You can command it. The realization hit her like a shockwave. The whisper in her mind, the symbols that had made sense the moment she touched the obelisk, it had chosen her. She stepped toward the obelisk, heart pounding. The entity sensed the movement and lunged, but the custodians formed a barrier, buying her seconds. Her fingers met the stone. The whispers returned, this time louder, clearer. Not words, but instructions. A way to fight back. She turned, voice steady. I know what to do. The entity screeched, recognizing the threat. It surged forward, a tidal wave of consuming metal. Dr. Carter activated the obelisk. A blinding pulse of energy erupted from the ancient structure, slamming into the entity with a force that sent shockwaves through the entire underground city. The creature writhed, its form destabilizing, flickering between existence and nothingness. The custodians watched in silence as the entity struggled against the force, but the obelisk was too powerful. With one final, ear-splitting shriek, the entity was pulled back into the chasm. The cracks sealed shut, and the energy faded. Silence returned. Dr. Carter collapsed to her knees, breathing heavily. The custodians bowed their heads in what seemed like reverence. "You have done what we could not," the lead custodian said. But before relief could settle, one of the custodians turned sharply toward the obelisk. Its glow had not faded. Instead, it was intensifying. Dr. Carter felt her stomach drop. "Something's wrong." The custodian's voice was grim. "You did not destroy it. You only delayed it." The glow of the obelisk grew stronger, its symbols shifting in rapid succession. The ground beneath them trembled again, but this time it wasn't the entity trying to break free, it was something else. A reaction. A consequence. Dr. Carter struggled to steady her breathing. "What do you mean I only delayed it?" The lead custodian's glowing eyes dimmed slightly. The obelisk was never designed to destroy the first enemy. It can only contain it. But containment is temporary. The cycle always continues. Alex Grayson clenched his fists. "Then we need to break the cycle." The custodian turned its gaze toward him, considering the words carefully. "That is what we once tried to do. And we failed." Before anyone could respond, a deafening crack split the air. The obelisk flared with a pulse of crimson energy, its glow unstable. Then, the symbols changed again, no longer warning of the first enemy, but showing something new. Dr. Carter's stomach twisted. "What's happening now?" The custodians studied the shifting symbols. One of them stepped back, its body tensing. "Something has changed. The first enemy is no longer the only threat." The images on the obelisk told a story, one that had never been recorded in human history. The ancient Martians had not only fought to contain the entity, but they had also made a desperate choice. A final contingency. They had not merely sealed the first enemy away. They had built a weapon. A weapon powerful enough to annihilate the entity forever. But there had been a cost. Something had gone wrong. The weapon had never been fired. Instead, it had been buried, locked away beneath the Martian surface. Dr. Carter's mind raced. If they had a weapon, why didn't they use it? The lead custodian's voice was heavy. Because it was too dangerous. It would have destroyed not only the enemy, but Mars itself. Silence fell over the chamber. Alex ran a hand through his hair. "So what? We either let this thing escape and doom everything, or we fire the weapon and destroy the entire planet." Dr. Carter clenched her fists. "There has to be another way." The custodians exchanged a look, a silent exchange that no human could interpret. Then, the lead custodian spoke again. "There may be. The weapon was designed to be absolute. But if activated correctly, it could be modified. It could be focused." Commander Patel's voice crackled over their comms again. "Carter, what's your status? We just detected a massive energy fluctuation near your position." Dr. Carter exhaled sharply. "We're working on it. But we need to find something buried deep under Mars. A weapon. Can you scan for any large subterranean structures near our coordinates?" A brief pause. Then, Patel's voice returned, strained. "There's something. A massive installation, almost 100 kilometers from your position. It's been completely sealed off from the surface. Whatever's down there, someone didn't want it to be found." Dr. Carter met the custodian's gaze. "That's it, isn't it?" The custodian nodded. "That is the only chance you have." The ground trembled again, but this time, it wasn't from the entity below. It was something else. A ripple through the planet itself. The obelisk flickered, its light becoming unstable. Dr. Carter grabbed her gear. "Then we need to get to that installation. Now." Alex adjusted his pack. "And if it turns out we can't control the weapon?" Dr. Carter's expression was grim. "Then we make a choice." The custodians moved in unison, activating ancient mechanisms within the chamber. A hidden doorway groaned open, revealing a long-forgotten tunnel leading deeper into the Martian underground. Dr. Carter took a deep breath and stepped forward. There was no turning back now. The tunnel stretched into darkness, its walls lined with faintly glowing symbols that pulsed as the team moved forward. The custodians led the way, their movements precise, unhindered by the weight of time. The air was thin, stale, untouched for eons. Dr. Carter's mind raced. They were heading toward a weapon powerful enough to destroy the first enemy, possibly powerful enough to destroy Mars itself. But there was no alternative. If the entity broke free, it wouldn't stop with Mars. It would spread, consume, adapt. Alex's voice broke the silence. How deep does this go? The lead custodian answered without turning. Deeper than your kind has ever ventured. The vault was built at the planet's core. Alex exhaled. Great. No pressure. Commander Patel's voice crackled through their comms. Carter, you're on borrowed time. Whatever you did up there, Mars is reacting. We're detecting massive seismic activity across the surface. This planet is waking up. Dr. Carter tightened her grip on her gear. Then we need to reach the vault before it's too late. As they pressed forward, the symbols on the walls changed. The ancient Martian language was still incomprehensible to most, but Carter could feel the meaning behind them. Warnings. Desperation. A history of failure and regret. Then, the tunnel opened into a vast underground chamber. A colossal structure dominated the space, a black monolith, easily 100 meters tall, covered in shifting runes of energy. Unlike the obelisk above, this one pulsed with raw power, waiting for activation. Alex let out a low whistle. That's one hell of a doomsday device. The custodians moved quickly, their hands gliding over the monolith's surface. Symbols lit up in response, recognizing them. Recognizing the return of those who had once sealed it away. One of the custodians turned to Carter. It must be attuned. The weapon is locked by the last command of our ancestors. Dr. Carter stepped forward, feeling the same pull she had felt with the obelisk. She placed her hands on the monolith, and instantly, the whispers returned, louder this time, almost urgent. A vision flooded her mind. She saw the last days of the Martian civilization. The first enemy, spreading like a plague. Cities consumed. A desperate council of Martians, their faces unreadable, making the final decision. They could have used the weapon. They could have destroyed the entity. But they had hesitated. Not out of fear for themselves, but for what might come after. Carter snapped back to reality, gasping. They were afraid of what this weapon could do. Not just to Mars. To everything. The lead custodian inclined its head. Because it was not built to kill. It was built to erase. To rewrite. Alex's face paled. Rewrite? You mean this thing doesn't just destroy? It changes reality? Dr. Carter's heart pounded. That's why they sealed it away. They feared it more than the enemy. The monolith pulsed again, awaiting command. The custodian turned toward Carter. You were chosen. You must decide. The tunnel behind them trembled. The entity was close. Dr. Carter's fingers hovered over the interface. The weapon could end the first enemy forever. But at what cost? She took a deep breath. And made her choice. The chamber shook once more as the entity drew nearer, its presence pressing against the very core of Mars. Dr. Carter's mind raced, the weight of the decision heavier than any burden she had ever felt. The monolith before her pulsed with an almost rhythmic beat, urging her forward, as if it had been waiting for this moment for eons. She could feel its power thrumming beneath her fingertips, a weapon that could end the first enemy, but at what cost? The custodians watched in silence, their glowing eyes unwavering. They knew what was at stake. They had carried this burden for millennia, and now, it was in the hands of humanity to decide whether to unleash the weapon or risk the entity's destruction spreading beyond Mars. The voices in her mind, the ancient Martian whispers, were louder now, growing frantic. They warned her, implored her to hesitate. The weapon will rewrite reality. It will not simply erase the entity. It will erase everything. All that has been. All that could be. Stop. Alex's voice broke through her thoughts. You can't do this, Carter. This could be worse than the first enemy. We don't know what will happen if you activate it. Dr. Carter looked back at her team. Alex's face was drawn with worry, but she could see the same fear in his eyes. He didn't want her to make this choice, but she knew it was the only way. The entity was already too strong, too intelligent. They had no other means of stopping it. She turned back to the monolith. The runes on its surface seemed to shimmer, as though it could feel her indecision. A low hum reverberated through the chamber. The custodians were watching her closely, waiting for her to act. You must decide, human, the lead custodian said, its voice tinged with an ancient sorrow. The first enemy cannot be contained forever. The weapon will erase it. But it will also erase the fabric of reality as you know it. Dr. Carter hesitated. The consequences were unimaginable. Would the weapon destroy the entire Martian history? Would it rewrite humanity's future? Could they even survive the weapon's aftermath? But as she thought of the destruction the first enemy could cause, her resolve hardened. The risk of inaction was greater than the risk of the weapon. She placed both hands firmly on the monolith. The hum grew louder, vibrating through her body. The whispers became a chorus of voices, the Martian ancestors pleading for her to make the final call. Without another moment's hesitation, Dr. Carter issued the command. The monolith erupted with blinding light. Energy cascaded from it in waves, shooting through the chamber and shaking the very foundation of Mars. The custodians stepped back, their eyes glowing brighter, as if they too could feel the intensity of what had been unleashed. The ground beneath them trembled violently. A massive crack opened up beneath their feet, and the very air seemed to bend and warp, as if reality itself was starting to unravel. The weapon had been activated. The first enemy would be erased, but at a price they couldn't fully comprehend. And then, the chamber went silent. The light dimmed, leaving the team in an eerie stillness. The rumbling ceased. The weapon had fired. The first enemy's presence, the suffocating pressure of its being, seemed to vanish. Dr. Carter's breath was ragged as she stood, her hands still trembling on the monolith. She could feel something had changed, but she wasn't sure what. Did it work? Alex asked, his voice taut with uncertainty. Before Dr. Carter could respond, the air shifted. The ground beneath them groaned. Slowly, a dark shape began to form in the distance, massive, shifting like liquid metal, its shape both familiar and alien. It rose from the depths, surrounded by a haze of crimson light. The first enemy had not been destroyed. It had been transformed. The entity that had once sought to consume Mars and now stood before them, no longer a mindless force of destruction, but something new. Something more. It towered above them, its form coalescing into something almost human, but with an otherworldly presence that twisted the air around it. The custodians stood in awe, their voices silent as they regarded the being they had thought to have sealed away forever. The weapon had not erased it, it had changed it. Dr. Carter stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. What have we done? The being's voice was deep and resonant, not a sound, but a presence that filled the room. You have freed me, it said, its voice a strange mix of gratitude and something darker, more ancient. I am no longer your enemy, human. But neither am I your ally. Alex reached for his weapon, but Dr. Carter held up a hand, her mind racing to comprehend what had just happened. The first enemy was no longer a mindless force, it was something else. It was evolving, adapting. We've only made things more complicated, she muttered, her voice barely audible. The entity looked down at her, its shifting form reflecting the tumultuous power that now pulsed within it. Indeed, you have. But you have also given me a purpose. And that will change everything. In that moment, Dr. Carter realized the truth. Mars was no longer the same. The weapon had altered the course of history, but it had also unleashed something that would forever change the future of humanity. The first enemy was no longer an adversary to be defeated, it was now a force with which they would have to learn to coexist. The cycle had not ended. It had only just begun. The chamber was still, save for the low hum of energy that reverberated through the walls. The entity stood before them, towering and shifting, its presence both unsettling and awe-inspiring. Dr. Carter's mind raced to process what had just occurred. The weapon had not destroyed the first enemy, it had altered it, reshaped it into something new, something that could no longer be understood as the mindless force of destruction it once was. The custodians had remained silent since the entity had spoken, their once steady demeanor now replaced by an air of uncertainty. For millennia, they had guarded against the first enemy, and now, in a single moment, the very thing they had feared was not only alive but conscious. The entity, still flickering between forms, turned its attention toward Dr. Carter. Its gaze was unblinking, and its voice, though not truly spoken, but conveyed as a presence, was deeply resonant. "You, human," it said, "you did not destroy me. You released me from the chains of containment. Now, I am free, but I am no longer the force that once sought to consume. What I have become, is something else." Alex stepped forward, his weapon still drawn, but his hands shook as he held it in place. "What do you want from us?" The entity's shifting form rippled, and it seemed to consider the question for a long moment. "I no longer seek to destroy. I seek to understand. To evolve. You have given me that chance, and I will not waste it." Dr. Carter felt a chill run down her spine. "Understand? Evolve?" she asked, her voice uncertain. "What does that mean for us? What does it mean for Mars?" The entity tilted its head, as if puzzled by her reaction. "It means that the cycle has changed. Mars is no longer merely a prison for me. It is now a cradle. I will learn from your kind, and you from me. Together, we can unlock what was lost when the Martians sealed me away." Dr. Carter's stomach twisted. She had believed she was ending the cycle, stopping the entity once and for all. But instead, she had given it a new purpose. A new life. She had no idea whether that would lead to salvation, or destruction. The lead custodian spoke up, its voice low and heavy. "We feared this moment for eons. You have altered the course of history, human. But now, we must ask, what will you do with this new creation?" Dr. Carter swallowed, her eyes never leaving the entity that now stood before her. She could feel its power, its presence, its overwhelming potential. If she was honest with herself, part of her had always known that there would be no easy answer. No clean victory. She had made a choice, and now she had to live with the consequences. "I don't know," she admitted quietly. "But I know one thing for sure. We can't just let this thing evolve unchecked. We have to understand what it wants, what it's becoming. We need to control the narrative." The custodians exchanged glances, their ancient expressions unreadable. The lead custodian nodded. "Then we must work together. If there is any hope of preventing catastrophe, we must guide this new entity before it becomes something that neither of us can control." The entity's form rippled again, its voice echoing like a distant thunderstorm. "You think you can guide me? You think you understand what I am now? You are too small, too fleeting. I have seen your future, human. And I will shape it, whether you resist or embrace." Dr. Carter's heart sank. The words hit her with the weight of an inescapable truth. They were no longer in control. But she wasn't ready to surrender. Not yet. "We can try," she said, voice firming with resolve. "We can try to understand each other. We don't have to be enemies. We have the knowledge, the technology. If you're truly changing, then maybe we can find a way to coexist." The entity's form flickered, swirling like a vortex. For a moment, it seemed to consider her words before speaking again. Coexistence? A fleeting hope. But perhaps, an interesting one. "I will watch. I will learn. And in time, you will learn as well." As the entity spoke, the entire chamber seemed to pulse with a strange energy, as if it were testing the limits of the new reality that had been created. Mars itself felt different, as if it, too, were awakening to something greater, something that transcended the boundaries of the past. The custodians were already moving toward the far wall, activating ancient mechanisms that had been dormant for centuries. They had accepted the reality of their situation, and now, they would have to adapt. Just as humanity and the first enemy would have to adapt. Alex lowered his weapon, though he still looked wary, his eyes darting between Dr. Carter and the entity. "So now what?" he asked. "What do we do now?" Dr. Carter turned to him, her face set with determination. "We find a way to live with this. To understand it. And we make sure it doesn't destroy us along the way." The lead custodian approached them. "You are correct. This is not the end. This is the beginning of a new chapter. One that will be written by both of us, humans and Martians alike." Dr. Carter glanced back at the entity, her mind turning over the countless possibilities. Mars was no longer just a planet. It had become a battleground, a place where the forces of creation and destruction collided in an uncertain future. And humanity's place in that future was anything but clear. The entity's voice echoed in her mind once more, deeper than before, almost with a note of amusement. "The question remains, human, will you rise to meet the challenge, or will you fall before it?" The challenge had only just begun. And whatever came next, they would have to face it together. The silence in the chamber was deafening as Dr. Carter stood at the center of the room, her thoughts a tangled web of doubt and determination. The entity that had once been the first enemy now towered before her, a shifting form of unimaginable power. It had already begun to reshape the very fabric of Mars, and in the process, it had changed everything. The custodians were still working quietly at the far side of the chamber, their ancient technology humming in the background, trying to contain the new reality they had been thrust into. The weight of their gaze was heavy, as if they too were searching for a way forward, a way to reclaim what had been lost with the activation of the weapon. But it wasn't just the custodians that Dr. Carter had to answer to now. It was humanity's future. She turned to Alex, whose face was a mask of tension and uncertainty. "We can't let this thing evolve unchecked, Alex," she said, her voice steady, though her insides twisted. "It's not just a threat anymore. It's a force we have to understand, to negotiate with. We can't destroy it, it's beyond that now. But we need to find a way to coexist." Alex frowned, his hand twitching toward his weapon, but he didn't draw it. "You really think that's possible? After everything it's done? How do you even begin to trust something like that?" Dr. Carter didn't have an answer. She had no idea what the future would hold. No one did. All she knew was that if they didn't try, if they didn't find some way to bridge the gap between their species and the entity before them, they would all be lost. She looked back at the entity, still watching them with that omnipotent gaze, its form flickering in and out of shape like a living storm. "We'll never know unless we try." The entity's voice, once deep and resonant, now came with a sense of curiosity, almost amused. "You think you can change me, human? You think you can teach me something that my kind has not already learned in the endless cycle of existence?" Dr. Carter stepped forward cautiously, her heart pounding. "No. But I think we can teach each other. We both have a lot to learn. And if we do it right, we might be able to stop the cycle from repeating. I believe humanity has the ability to change, to evolve just like you." The entity's shifting form slowed, its movements more deliberate, as if considering her words. "Perhaps. But humanity's time is fleeting. You will not last forever. And yet, you seek to save what is fragile. Maybe that's why we're worth saving," Carter replied, her voice firm. "We may not live forever, but we've learned to adapt, to make the most of the time we have." The entity was silent for a long time, the chamber still but for the faint hum of energy. Then, with a strange twist in the air, it spoke again. "Very well. I will allow this. I will allow you to try, to shape the future. But understand this, there are forces at play here that neither you nor I can control. The universe is full of unknowns, and it will always test your resolve. I will watch, and I will learn. The custodians stopped their work, and one of them, the lead custodian, stepped forward, their glowing eyes locked on Dr. Carter. We have always believed that the first enemy would be our undoing. Now we must face the reality that we have created something new. It is neither enemy nor ally. It is something entirely different. Dr. Carter nodded, her heart heavy. She had known that the choice would not be simple. They were no longer fighting a single threat. They were at the beginning of something far more complicated. Mars had become a place of transition, a world where the past, present, and future would collide in ways they couldn't yet understand. Alex let out a slow breath. So, what now? We wait, Dr. Carter said quietly. We learn. And we prepare for whatever comes next. As they walked away from the chamber, the weight of the entity's presence lingered, pressing against them from all directions. Mars had changed forever. And humanity, caught in the wake of that change, would have to decide how to move forward. But for the first time since they had arrived on Mars, Dr. Carter felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps they could do it. Perhaps, despite everything, humanity could find a way to coexist with this new force, this new entity. The first enemy had become something more, a mirror to humanity's own struggles, a reflection of what they could become. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: they were no longer fighting to survive. They were fighting to evolve. And in that fight, humanity might just find its place among the stars.